All right, let's jump right into this explainer with a scenario. It starts in your kitchen, but it ends up asking a massive question about the very future of our civilization. Today, we're unpacking the incredibly fragile balance that keeps modern life humming along, and what actually happens when the foundation of that life starts to shake. Imagine waking up to a totally new reality. The heat outside is getting noticeably worse and honestly harder to escape. At the exact same time, you open your electricity bill and it is climbing higher and higher. And to top it all off, your groceries are creeping up in price every single week. So what if heat, power, and food prices all rose together?
You see, we aren't just talking about one isolated problem here, not even two. We're looking at a scenario where all three of these foundational elements compound at once. The room feels hotter, the fridge costs way more to keep running, and your paycheck somehow feels smaller no matter how hard you work. We're exploring a massive domino effect. It's a story about survival, intense stress, widening inequality, and the sheer climate pressure testing modern life.
Part 1. The Quiet Beginning. Because, this nightmare wouldn't start with widespread panic in the streets. It would begin quietly, right inside your own home. Families would make immediate, seemingly manageable sacrifices. You might swap the air conditioner for a simple desk fan, or maybe you decide to cross meat off the grocery list for a few days to save some cash. Maybe you delay buying that new fridge because the power cost alone is just too much to justify. Now, these choices seem small, right? But they actually signal the start of a massive social shift.
Which brings us to part 2, the vicious loop.
These problems don't just stay in their own separate lanes. They compound. First, relentless hot weather inherently increases our need for power just to cool our homes. Because that demand skyrockets, the power itself becomes much more expensive. And the final blow? Food becomes costlier too, because the entire agricultural chain relies heavily on that exact same, now expensive energy. So, step 1, 2, and 3, the system starts feeding on itself, crushing household budgets from 3 directions all at once. If you follow the energy trail from the farm to the store, it's pretty eye-opening. Food production depends on energy at literally every single step. We're talking about fertilizer production, running heavy farm machinery, massive cold storage facilities, down to the fuel in the transportation and delivery trucks. If heat and power rise, the whole chain becomes exponentially more expensive before your food ever hits the supermarket shelf.
And there's a quote that captures this perfectly. The grocery store is not where inflation starts. It is where inflation finally becomes visible to the customer. That sticker price you see on your groceries, it's not the beginning of the problem. It's really just the last stop in a much longer, energy-draining story. The grocery store is merely where the reality of all these compounding costs finally catches up to you.
Part 3. The Human Toll. This is where a seemingly abstract financial problem rapidly evolves into a severe physical reality. Because, let's face it, food and shelter are not optional. We are being attacked from multiple angles here. Look at the physical toll. Rising heat means worse sleep, which leads to forced rationing of your cooling, and then shifting to cheaper, less nutritious calories. But follow that down to the emotional level. You've got irritability from the heat, intense anxiety over utility bills, and arguments over tight budgets. The emotional temperature of society rises right alongside the actual temperature outside. And this brings us to a severe psychological phenomenon known as decision fatigue. This is the mental exhaustion caused by constantly choosing how to stretch a budget across basic survival needs. When every single day includes agonizing over which bills to pay or exactly how much cooling you can afford to turn on, the mind becomes totally exhausted. The horizon of life shrinks. You stop planning for next year, and you start worrying purely about how to survive next week, or even just tonight. Now, as you might expect, this burden is absolutely not shared equally. Wealthy households can absorb these higher prices for a lot longer. They can afford better insulation, backup generators, and just generally maintain their flexible lifestyles and premium groceries. But lower-income households, they live closer to the edge and feel every single price increase immediately. It makes them incredibly vulnerable to overheated and underfed conditions, creating a dangerous social divide where basic comfort simply becomes a privilege. Moving on to Part 4, Systems Under Pressure. Zooming out from the individual household, we can see how this triple threat starts breaking down the broader macroeconomy. The pressure crushes everyday consumers and businesses alike. Restaurants are paying a premium just for refrigeration. Warehouses are paying more to cool inventory. Factories face massive production energy costs. Delivery trucks are burning more fuel on hot roads. And small shops struggle as their customers become hyper-price sensitive. Dealing with one cost increase is hard enough. Dealing with 3 at once? It destroys profit margins and fundamentally reshapes entire industries. And then, inevitably,
we hit political explosions. When the room is too hot and the fridge is too empty, public anger grows incredibly fast. Governments would come under massive pressure because heat waves and price shocks are felt physically in the body. I mean, you don't need a news report to tell you you're too hot and hungry, right? This creates an incredibly volatile public mood because the problem is immediate, undeniable, and deeply, deeply personal.
Part 5. A forced transformation.
Now, I know this sounds completely bleak, but there is actually another side to this coin. Even in a massive pressure cooker world, humans are astonishingly creative when survival is on the line. Hard times destroy some systems, sure, but they actively accelerate others. A crisis of this scale forces vital innovations. We would see huge investments in solar energy and renewable grids, advanced insulation, cutting-edge cold storage tech, drought-resistant and vertical farming, and public cooling centers. We are very good at inventing solutions when a problem becomes impossible to ignore.
But honestly, the biggest shift might actually be in our minds. We would likely transition from a psychology of abundance to a psychology of preparedness. Instead of assuming essentials will always be cheap and available and treating energy like background infrastructure that just takes care of itself, society would start focusing on resilience. We'd start valuing energy as a precious resource, stocking supplies, and learning practical skills. It would fundamentally change our culture, replacing old assumptions with a new mindset focused on deep responsibility.
And as we navigate that cultural shift, there's a really powerful realization. When systems get expensive, neighbors matter more. The old idea that everyone can just handle life alone, in their own isolated bubble, starts to collapse under shared pressure. It proves that local support networks, families, and communities are our true safety nets. We simply cannot adapt in isolation.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. How do we build a society that can survive heat without collapsing under the cost of cooling it? It's a massive challenge, and it's going to require new technology, smart policy, and a huge cultural shift. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. How will you prepare your own community to adapt and change before crisis becomes collapse? Thanks so much for exploring this vital topic with me today.